pretty large group today. So with that, and with the amount of material that we're going to cover, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started since it's right at 10:01 on my computer. So hi, my name is Sarah O'Brien. I am a senior research associate here at the UNC Highway Safety Research Center. And we're very excited this year with the Watch for Me program to open up the trainings that we've been doing the last couple of years for a larger audience. So this is our first year of offering these trainings to people who may not necessarily be in a Watch for Me community. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. And you'll notice that maybe some of the slides are a little bit more geared towards the communities that are Watch for Me communities, but hopefully this just piques your interest in the program. So with that, Seth, can you advance the slide, please? So we're just going to go through it quickly because we expect a pretty large number of folks to be on the Zoom today. We do ask that you mute your microphone if you're not directly talking or have a question for the speaker. Feel free to have your camera on if you would like, or keep your camera off. We're totally fine with that either way. You probably noticed that the session is being recorded. That's because we're going to post the video of this at the end of, well, probably next week, actually. We'll post it on the website so that anybody else in your community who might be interested in the information who wasn't able to attend today will still be able to access the recording and view it. With that, technology can sometimes be interesting. So if you do have problems with the audio, you can try to dial in to the Zoom instead of using your computer audio. If you do start having connection issues, sometimes turning off your camera can help save that bandwidth, or, worst case scenario, maybe exit the Zoom and re-enter if you need to. Kristen Blank is going to be in the background helping us with any kind of tech support issues. So if you do have any questions or need some troubleshooting assistance, you can chat Kristen in the chat box at any time. And so with that, let's move into a little bit of background for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with the Watch for Me program. It's a North Carolina program that aims to reduce pedestrian and bicycle injuries and deaths through a comprehensive, targeted approach of public education, community engagement, and leveraging specific law enforcement efforts. So this program year, we welcomed 22 communities into the program, and many of these are returning communities, but there are also a few communities that maybe participated in prior years, but not recently. And so, and we've got some communities that are expanding their programming into partnering or neighboring communities as well. So some of you may not be a part of a Watch for Me program, and that is perfectly okay. The information that we'll be providing today and through the series of workshop modules that we're offering is really relevant to any community or individual that might be interested in that goal of reducing pedestrian and bicyclist injuries and deaths. Next slide. So these series that we're doing, we just wanted to kind of show you how it progresses. So today we're doing the safe systems approach. And then next module is focused on traffic laws and enforcement practices. And then after that, we've got one on roadway design. And then the next one is on crash data investigation and reporting. And then the final one is on communications around bicyclist and pedestrian safety. So for those of you who are in a Watch for Me community, in order to get your materials, which we'll talk about again in a little while, the law enforcement agency has to participate in at least attending the traffic laws and enforcement practices module 2. And then 2 others of your choice. And then once you've attended 3 modules, with one of them being the traffic laws and enforcement practices, you'll be eligible to receive your materials. Next slide, please. So as a part of that, we also are tracking attendance, of course, and that is also reported to the Governor's Highway Safety Program. They are the sponsor of this Watch for Me NC program. And so they also provide points for agencies that participate in the Watch for Me program. And then, as I mentioned earlier, your community would also be eligible to receive those Watch for Me education safety training materials if you meet your workshop commitments. Okay, so some other setups here. If you do have questions, again, because of the number of people we have today, please do use the chat box. Kristen and I will help to monitor that and jump in if we need to as Seth is going through his presentations. We will have some times built into the workshop for actual discussions, and at those points, please feel free to turn on your camera and turn on your microphone and actually verbally discuss and ask questions and share. But if you have a question as we go through, use the chat box and we'll monitor that. So let's all try using the chat box. For introductions, because we don't have time as we would like to maybe go around and have everybody introduce themselves, we've got a unique way of doing that today. In the chat, we'd like you to type your name and the agency or department that you're representing today. And then you'll also see a link there to a Mentimeter website and a code. And you can either pull it up using the QR code, or you can type it in separately to a different browser on your computer. And once you get there, you will see where it says the biggest issue I see in my community is. And so I'm actually going to show what that looks like on the screen. If you are able to get over to that Mentimeter.com website and enter in that link, then you should then see this screen that I'm sharing with you now. Are Kristen or Seth, is somebody confirming that you guys can see the screen that I'm sharing?
I can see it, Sarah.
Great. So as folks start entering in, I'll give you a few seconds to think about this, but as you start to respond to the question here, or the STEM statement here, it will start to create a word cloud on the screen. And if you are having trouble getting to the Mentimeter.com location or using that code, go ahead and text us or chat into the chat box if you're having issues. Oh, I see somebody putting I see lots showing up now. I'm going to jump up just a second and close my office door. And you should be able to put in at least 3, statements or ideas. I think you can even maybe go back and do more if you need to. It's interesting to see how things are changing. Speeding seems to be coming up as a high concern. Lack of infrastructure. Bigger vehicles. It seems like a good mix between bicycle and pedestrian issues. So that's something to think about. Your individual community may have more concerns related to pedestrian issues, and other communities may have more issues related to bicyclists or issues with things related to safety for bicyclists. Speeding, of course, affects both bicyclists and pedestrians, and really anybody on the road, motor vehicles as well. So you may be resonating also with comments that other people are making. It might jog an idea in your head about, oh yeah, we also have that issue, or I see that as a problem as well. Okay, well, I appreciate everybody taking some time to reflect a little bit about some of the issues that you may be bringing to the table of this workshop today. We'll certainly address how some of these aspects fit into thinking through a safe systems approach. And please do join us for the rest of the series, where we might get into more details on some of these issues that you're facing as well. With that, I am going to turn it back over to Seth to pick back up with the rest of the slides.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you everyone for your wonderful input into the Menti exercise. Seems like we had a lot of good themes there. Just briefly, like Sarah, I'm at the, my name is Seth Lajeunesse, but I work at the Highway Safety Research Center at the UNC, along with my colleague, Kristen Blank. We've been working on Watch for Me program for about a decade now, and have learned a lot through this. And what we hope to do today is to start bringing in some of the systems kind of approach to the problems at hand. So all the things that we just shared in Menti around lack of infrastructure or political will, vehicles not stopping, all of these things really have import for what we're going to be talking about today. Just very briefly, we'll discuss, I think a lot of us are here already for this purpose, but we're going to discuss why bike and ped safety really does matter, how the safety of people outside of vehicles, riding bikes and walking, it really is a complex or wicked problem. And to really explore how we can draw upon the partnerships as a means to really start addressing this problem, both more immediately in the interim term and longer term. And we're going to also go through some systems exercises today. We call them the 6 R's. So we're going to kind of step through those today and just explore how we can start thinking about maybe our role in the system, the resources we have at our disposal. That's just as an example. So why does the safety of people on bikes and walking really matter? Well, I'll tell you. One is that virtually all of us are pedestrians, at least at some point of our trip. It may be from our origin to the destination, or it could be from our car even to the destination itself, from the transit stop that we just got dropped off at. Walking and biking are increasingly popular in the state. We've seen that especially too, that was accelerated under the pandemic, a lot of the restrictions. And people were kind of rediscovering the outdoors or even their communities on foot and on bike. And as we know, a lot of the people gathered here, this is not news, right? But it's just wonderful for exercise and physical activity. The environmental quality and local economies, these things are all good. It benefits everyone when we improve the conditions for biking and walking. And let's face it, about 1/3 of our population are either too young, maybe they have disabilities where they cannot drive, or they simply do not want to drive. In fact, that the number of people, the proportion of people who are not looking to live a more car-dependent lifestyle is increasing as well. So just some of the reasons. So again, we're just going to look at this, sort of take a step back at the big picture here, what we're really contending with and talking about. And when I earlier mentioned that, bicyclist and pedestrian safety is a wicked problem, what I mean by that is that it's just really, really complex in terms of the way we make our arrange socially, in our social groups, but also organizations that are involved in this space, right? The solutions that we have today, we don't know how those are actually going to play out in the future. So they could have unintended consequences. And the nature of the problem itself is constantly changing. So it's really difficult at any given time to really understand what's happening to address that. So this is why we really need to start thinking about the system and realizing that we simply cannot solve this complex problem with single agency actions. We know from research, right, that enforcement alone is not going to cut it. We need other things. One-time actions, we're not going to pamphlet our way or flyer our way out of this. Just handing out flyers can be helpful, but it has to be in a much broader context of a campaign. And then the Band-Aid actions of, say anti-jaywalking, for instance. This is not something that Watch for Me is about at all. This doesn't address the reasons people quote jaywalk, which is a term we don't necessarily like to use given the pejorative nature of it. They're usually frustrated pedestrians. The environment is not really built for them, and they're maybe crossing outside of a marked crosswalk because of that. So you're not really addressing the system itself when you just give a ticket out to someone who might be operating outside of a designated space. What these wicked problems really need is a way that we can start looking at the broader system and leveraging aspects of it. And I'll talk about that in detail in a bit for transformative change. This is what we really need across different sectors, across different environments. So what this requires is strong partnerships, this sustained action on multiple fronts. Right, we need to all be pushing in a very fruitful direction. And I think we really do need to start from a position of a shared understanding of the system at play. And this is what we're going to be discussing today with these 6 R's of systems. So what role, we always talk about roles as one of the R's in the system. What role does Watch for Me play in this? One is that ideally, we're providing motivation and data to support the program, the tools, trainings, materials. So this training today is certainly something. The resources that we have available. So it's not only the program resources, it's also the resources found within your partnerships, right? And we've seen it over time, again, over this last decade, we've seen that Watch for Me can serve as a catalyst for thinking about the complexity of these issues, to really kind of shoring up partnerships where everyone is sort of aligning their goals, right? And they have a shared vision for where they want to be heading. Tools for engaging the broader community. How do we know where and when the biggest problems are in our community? How are we engaging people where they are at? And then thinking about how we can integrate and implement Watch for Me within a broader framework for injury prevention in our communities. So again, we've seen this applied across the state. So I'm going to go into the 6 R's of systems. So it's no longer mysterious. What we mean by that, this schematic here, we can kind of walk through it. You'll see on the left, we have resources entering this system. And inside that ellipse, you see people that are serving certain roles. Notice the different colors of the dots in there. These are people in different sectors that are working together. You see the way that they're linked together with those lines, the relationships between them and among them. And around them, we have the roles that all of the people with different roles and all the relationships and partnerships they have, the roles that they have to abide by. These are both codified roles, so very explicit roles around funding, around what you could use funding for, around who owns a roadway and what you can do on that, and the rewards and the norms, all sorts of ways that the rules sort of bound what we're able and willing to do. And then we have the record of the past, which is just below here, which helps us guide where we might be headed. So the record of the past can help us discern patterns that we're seeing in injury, for instance, that we really want to get a handle on in the present day. And then those results. The results are really about what success looks like. So together in our roles with our relationships with our partners, given resources at hand and the roles we're operating within, what do we think success looks like in this system? What do we want to see more of? What do we want to see less of, for instance? So that's what we'll talk about today. We like to talk, each time we discuss the R's of systems, we like to talk first about the end. We want to go, where are we headed with all of this? What are the results we want to see, right? And a couple of key points about that are that the results are not just something that one or two partners make up. All partners have to be on board with this. Again, what does success look like to us in our community, right? And when we have evaluation and monitoring measures in place that reflect those successes, we know we're on the right track or we need to change course. So the results helps drive not only what we see as success, but how are we going to measure that? How are we going to assess when we've arrived at a place of those desired results? So an example of success, one of course, the successes or results we want to see in the system is a reduction, right, in crashes with pedestrians and cyclists. In a crash-based evaluation from a few years ago, we noted that comparing counties that were operating Watch For Me programs versus those that had not over time, we documented a pretty significant decrease rather in crashes with pedestrians. The failed to yield type crashes and the nighttime crashes reduced pretty significantly. Of course, we'd love to see more, but this variable alone, participation and engagement with Watch For Me was associated with these outcomes. So we see this as definitely a sign of success. But of course, always we want more. And we also have other goals and other results that we want to see, right? An example of this are more kids safely walking to school, but walking just in the community in general. That could be some measure of success. And then you can see how that inform our evaluation measures or our metrics, right? We have to come up with metrics to basically count or really understand how many kids are out there walking and biking. Another one could simply be focused on our coalitions themselves, right? So more people from more sectors participating in our Watch For Me NC coalitions. That's something we've also seen over the years, is that they've become more diverse in a lot of cases. People from different sectors, like in housing or sustainability, involved in Watch For Me, in public health, just some examples. So the importance of evaluation here, I mean, I don't think we can really overstate it, to be honest. Again, with those results, we have to have some means of understanding to what extent we're actually reaching or realizing those results that we want to see, right? So the evaluation helps us track activities and share successes and lessons, really understand what's working in what context. And then that earlier slide that showed that the crash reductions helps us really understand what's happening in the community and estimate the program impact. It's really about, to me, and for many of us, this is about learning from our experiences. A lot of times in systems, we like to say, let's get started and then get better. You get started on something and get better. And the way you get better, right, is really understanding what seems to work, when, with whom, and in what context. So this helps us in our HSRC team develop technical assistance to help you when you're implementing Watch For Me. And then of course, the last one is really about securing future funding. If we can show the successes, if we can illustrate how this is changing communities in a positive way, then of course that relates to it being supported by our sponsors. And in this case, that's the Governor's Highway Safety Program. We're very grateful to have that funding from them. So just a bit about the evaluation requirements. Hopefully they're manageable. You can access the form here This is mostly about enforcement. The way that we do in the program, things outside of enforcement, say community engagement, is through sort of bi-monthly touch points with the communities, just to check in to see who are you working with, what have you been doing, what have you been learning or observing. For the law enforcement officers, it's really about how much time are we spending, what kind of outreach we're doing, sort of number of times we're doing it during a given time frame, enforcement operations. Then we're also interested in to see if there's other players involved, like our media getting involved. Is the media covering anything that you're doing? Do you have any results? Have you done any evaluation of conflicts or crashes? And of course, any problems or issues that we can help troubleshoot, provide resources around. So with the results, we go to resources. And by resources, we use more of an expansive definition. What we really mean by resources is not only material goods, but our time. Our time is a resource, right? Our skills and our know-how is something that we can bring to bear. And then, of course, the program engagement materials, which Sarah referenced, happen after the law enforcement trainings. And then resources within our partnerships in general. All of this brings something different to the table and oftentimes very valuable. So we can see our partners, especially from different sectors, as major resources in our effort. So just some examples of the material engagement. And again, these materials are really meant to sort of reinforce messaging that you're delivering in multiple ways. But it's just about looking out for one another. This program is really about considering the other road users, and especially for drivers to understand the laws about this, but also think about the perspective of pedestrians and cyclists, giving them enough space, for instance, when passing a cyclist, yielding and stopping for pedestrians who are simply trying to cross the street. So the law enforcement trainings, of course, we're not going to go into detail here, but just to let everyone know, what they are is really talking about enforcement practices. You know, how do you set that up? The operations, what does that even look like? And there's additional sessions of the choice. Some are focused on laws. Basically, the traffic laws have to be understood by everybody, right? There's other ones that are more technical around how you do specific sort of campaigns. Also, we have Brian Massengill here, Sergeant Brian Massengill with the Durham City Police, who has really offered his services to, again, provide technical assistance to law enforcement officers, to his colleagues in law enforcement, around any of the issues they're encountering or any questions they have. Again, at these sessions afterward, the watch for me materials are given out to those participating. So what you see here with the trainings is something Sarah has already touched upon. So I'm just going to kind of go over this very quickly. As you can see, we go from the safe systems approach, and then we go into the laws, design of roadway, crash data and reporting, and then communication. So we try to provide a bit of a holistic kind of view and perspective and some training around each element of these. If you're not aware, we have in North Carolina kind of a unique and valuable tool around pedestrian and bicycle crash data. You can access it here on this website, bikeinfo.org/pbcat_NC. What you can see there goes back to, I believe, 1997. And we're just about, a colleague had told me, we're just about to add 2021 data. It's still being sort of finalized. But what we can see there is basically some details around the people involved in motor vehicle, pedestrian, and motor vehicle bicycle crashes, such as their age, their genders. You can see what time of day, the different communities. You can look at the county level or city, things like that. Highly recommend it if you're interested in looking at kind of trends in your community. Partners. These are critical to getting anything done, right? To really understanding. So an example that we've seen over the years is schools and districts. So bicycle safety clinics are just a great example of how kids can get sort of age-appropriate messaging, but really importantly, skills practice, really understanding, practicing safer behaviors under supervision. We know there's many resources that are available or adjacent to Watch for Me NC. There's Let's Go NC curriculum, right, for teaching kids how to safely bike and walk. There are the NHTSA's Pedestrian and Bicycle Safer Journey. There's even tips for caregivers and crossing guard trainings that are all available mostly to the K through 12 sort of audience. These are just examples of resources that our partners can bring to bear to this as well. So from results and resources, now we head to rules. Like I kind of said at the beginning, rules are both formal, like laws and policies, but they're also often informal, like norms or standard practices and procedures within different agencies. And when you think about the rules, often they help shape our expectations related to safety messaging and interventions, right? So it's not like a community-based organization is going to be giving a lot of law enforcement related messaging, for instance. That's sort of a norm that we have established, right? So thinking about the rules we have within the system and what they sort of allow us to do, what they facilitate and what they might inhibit, and sort of designing around those if we can. So examples of these are really setting speed limits. There's all kinds of rules and procedures around that. Using speed safety cameras, whether or not that's even permitted in your community and maybe your division in the DOT. What kind of policies are on the books with respect to land use and parking policies, right? These all have impact on how far people travel when you have more sprawling land use or more generous free parking policies. You start seeing that can generate a lot of traffic, more vehicle traffic. And just as an example of how something can relate to safety. And then just, of course, where do larger trucks, like freight and delivery vehicles, where are they allowed to go? A lot of places, though, on main streets, they won't be allowed to go there. But these are things that are often under local control. And also the red light cameras. As you can imagine, each of these roles can be highly political, right? It's often not easy to change any of these roles. So it's really understanding what are the roles that we're operating within. These are just some examples of those. I'm sure many of you can think of others. If you feel like there's others that spring to mind, please do put them in the chat. I'd love to see what you think. Other rules relate not only to what we see there around the procedures and policies, but what about the rules around the Watch for Me goals, the partners and the strategies that we have if we have, say, Vision Zero in our community? Thinking about how Watch for Me itself in how this is a community engagement strategy, how this might integrate with new or changed infrastructure, right? Where we're putting crosswalks and signals, maybe building out the sidewalk network or putting in bike facilities, bike share programs. How are we communicating about these things with people? What role can Watch for Me play in that? And then thinking about how we build Watch for Me into looking into the future, in the plans and policies that we have. So we know that police departments often develop these strategic enforcement plans. Can we get Watch for Me engagement in there? Municipal transportation plans, a lot of cities and towns, as you know, put together these plans. But also like public engagement protocols. How are we going to routinize it? How are we going to proceduralize public engagement? Watch for Me provides some help with this. This is a much broader system though. How are we actually learning from people in the community about where our major safety problems are? What does that look like? And then what role can Watch for Me play in that? So when we think about sustaining Watch for Me, oftentimes when we talk with partners, we think about, this is definitely sort of a program rather than a campaign that's circumscribed. And we want to think about how we sustain it in practice. Instead of having to reinvent the wheel every year, how do we get it really into the way we do business? And what we've learned again is that it's practices that are really built upon strong partnerships where there's a system of accountability among the partners. Community buy-in. Do people think that this is a good thing in this community? Do they trust the government actors that are involved in this? And then thinking through the in-house capacity. So within our own agencies, we can start thinking about our roles, but also within our partnerships. What does onboarding look like? And also succession planning. So when someone's new to our coalition, what does it look like? How do we bring them up to speed with what Watch for Me is and what their role might be in the system? And then succession planning, if we have leaders, right, that we know are going to be retiring or moving out of town, how do we pass the baton? What's the plan for that? Ideally, we would see Watch for Me embedded in plans and budgets, right? These sort of codify things in town procedure. And then again, the roles around how are we going to know if what we're doing is actually impacting anything positively? So getting back to those roles again, or the results rather, that we want to see. Let's document these things. Let's develop some rules around that for how often we measure, what we measure, that sort of thing. Just briefly want to mention some funding. And again, there's rules around everything, right? So federal funding can be seen as a resource. And we put this under rules here because it's a resource that definitely comes with some rules. So when you think of the the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, there's rules around, who's even eligible to receive those funds, the kind of reporting requirements that are set up for that. What about Transportation Alternatives Set Aside, right? That federal program. Or CMAQ, if you're in a non-attainment area for air quality, maybe you're eligible for congestion mitigation funds. That's something that can definitely go to pedestrian and bicycle programming. Federal Transit Administration funds. This is something we've been talking with our Vision Zero communities in North Carolina about. You can actually get funding for those to improve pedestrian safety, especially relates to getting to and from transit. And most people who get to and from transit are walking, right? The HSIP funds, or a Highway Safety Improvement Program, these are data-driven, as you know. So if you have data, again, if part of your results are crashes and injuries that you're looking to reduce significantly, that can feed into an application for HSIP funds. And then, of course, there are a number of statewide planning research or metropolitan funds that you probably have a much better sense of locally in your context. I will say that the new bipartisan infrastructure law, the notice of funding opportunities will be coming out quite soon, and these roles actually might change a bit. And I know they're adding certain funding programs like Safe Streets for All program, for instance, that will have different rules around it. But by and large, these are some of the larger federal programs that you can certainly make use of and are consistent with Watch for Me. Now, if you go down to the state and local funding, there's all sorts. No doubt a lot of you that work in town or city government are aware of these. Contingency funding and PAL bill funding. PAL bill comes from the state. Local bonds. This is something that a lot of places that want to build out their sidewalks without a lot of state funding or support, well, usually they'll issue bonds in the area, and that can support them developing, filling out their sidewalk network or bike network. We've definitely heard of health foundations providing support as well. Not only is there that, there's even hyperlocal funding like revenue from parking index. It's not necessarily street level meters, but revenue index can be used for improvements to bicycle and pedestrian. There's general fund, sort of vehicle registration fees that pay into the general fund that could be used for street maintenance. So you think of things like road reallocations or road diets. Service districts, again, every municipality is different. Some do establish these service districts where they can exact fees or impact fees for development. Again, those could be used. The Tourism District Authority, they have these occupancy tax revenues. So this is basically for things like hotels motels. About a quarter of these tax revenues can go to improvements linked to tourism only, but you can kind of get creative here. If you think of maybe downtown locations where the pedestrian streetscape could be improved, and you can make an argument that that's going to assist with tourism. Again, just kind of getting creative with the different funding and understanding the roles within all of these funding programs as well can be super helpful. So I think we're going to take a bit of a moment here to reflect upon some of what we just discussed, but really about the resources. So this is your time, materials, partners, know-how that you can draw upon. If you'd like, we can put these in the chat. If you want to reflect upon these, first starting with resources, what can you draw upon to improve bike ped safety? And then what are some of the roles that apply to your work on doing this, on improving bike ped safety? So we can take just a few minutes to do that and provide some ideas in the chat. Love to hear from you.
And if anybody is bold enough and would like to come off of mute and turn your camera on, I think we actually do have time for folks to share with the group on the line as well.
Thank you, Sarah. That's right. Anyone who is brave enough, please join us in this space.
Hi, Katie Jones. I'm the chair of our town of Mebane Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Commission. Full disclosure, former HSRCer. So hello, Seth. Hello, Sarah. Not a part of Watch for Me, but we have leaned extensively on community groups. I know you talked about that and referenced that a little bit. Yes, so local running groups, local trails groups, and really helping them see the benefit. Obviously they're going to see the benefit of improving safety, but they're out there to get together as a group and run. I think if we can leverage them, especially for our community outreach and providing input and helping facilitate additional community input. So we're in the process of an improvement to our plan, and so looking to engage with those resources. I think that sometimes human resources are so limited. So if you can really branch out and make sure that you've got really extensive community groups and getting their feedback, it can be very helpful. So, and hi, nice to see you.
Oh, Seth, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Katie, pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and for speaking up. And I think your idea is a really great one. Yeah, for those who are kind of already bought in, right? Maybe have a bit more time affluence than the average staff member, for instance, or these people are often members of the community, right? And they can be a sort of conduit to the community and really can be wonderful resources. Totally agreed. Do others have ideas? Looks like Keith Sorensen says their bicycle advisory committee, as well as local bike advocacy organizations, Sustain Charlotte. Keith, I don't know if you wanted to expound upon that or just leave that as is.
Sure, I can jump in and just say, we've gotten a lot of support for the work we do through our Bicycle Advisory Committee. It's a council mayor appointed committee of individuals who are basically stakeholders in the cycling community, and just to have their voice. They'll write letters of endorsement for projects that we're working on, to recommend to council, help push for increasing the bike program budget, going from $4 million of on-cycle to $8 million of on-cycle now. This coming fall, so definitely that.
Keith, thank you for that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear about the sort of budgetary increase too. So it sounds like there's some influence on the bicycle advisory committee to actually can influence some policy. And I've definitely heard good things about Sustain Charlotte, especially in the realm of the Vision Zero program. They're one of the newer partners and seem to really bring a lot of the community perspective into linking safety outcomes with other outcomes related to climate and equity, things like that. That's wonderful to hear that. Thank you for sharing, Keith.
Seth, it just occurred to me that we've mentioned Vision Zero a few times now, and I'm not sure how familiar everybody is on the call with that term. So maybe do you want to give a little brief primer so that people know what we're talking about?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That's so true. We have our own lingo, don't we? And don't often have to kind of make sure that we're inclusive in thinking about all the program names that we have. So yes, Sarah, you great point. We since actually 2016, I believe, or 2018, I'm not even sure. Mark Gazelle is on the call. He could probably correct me here, but North Carolina has endorsed and actually launched a Vision Zero program in the state. And what that means is basically this vision for getting to a point where we've eliminated serious and fatal injury on our roads. And the way it's sort of organized in North Carolina is that it's very much a sort of grassroots effort where cities and a county in one case, so about 10 of them are forming coalitions that are local. So Charlotte is one example of that, with this sort of multi-sector coalition that's working together to really understand the nature of the problems they're seeing through data, through community engagement, and then drawing upon, again, drawing upon the R's, the resources to their disposal, the rules that they're operating in, to really start developing plans for how exactly we're going to address the major safety problems through our built environment, but also our organizational practices and priorities. How we're going to really understand what's working and what's not. So setting up systems, looking at crash patterns and developing high injury network maps. But not only that, looking at the risk upon our networks. So where it's risky and crashes may not have shown up there yet, but we know given the context, it's likely to. Engaging those communities that are most affected by this. So these are people that tend to be lower income, tend to be Black and brown communities, and really without a lot of options for getting around. So again, we're recognizing at HSRC, where Sarah and Kristen and I work, we're working with our partners at UNC here at the Injury Prevention Research Center to help sort of coordinate all these 10 communities in a way that they're learning from each other. And we're seeing it all the time. And also convening a statewide task force that can help provide guidance and resources to them. So these are state level actors that have access to different sorts of resources than just local ones. Again, with this idea that only together and only with different multiple perspectives can we actually start addressing these very complex problems of road trauma on our streets. So yeah, thank you, Sarah. That was great. I think what we'll do, and again, by all means, because we're recording this and we're kind of capturing the discussion too, please feel free to chat if you have questions about anything that you'd like to contribute to this conversation in the chat as we go along. And again, anytime we stop, please feel free to unmute yourself, even show yourself on camera, whatever you're comfortable doing, so you can contribute and really help us understand your perspective and how this might work in your community. So with that, I am going to move on here to a 5-minute break. So what just generally means is that we are at 10:51. So if we can convene at 10:55, you can do whatever you will within those 5 minutes. Just wanted to take a break because we're right about at the midpoint here. And we'll reconvene and talk through the other R's and how it all kind of fits together. Just move along. Going to move along here, cover these other R's, and hopefully engage in some really substantive discussion. This record of the past R is something I think a lot of us that work in safety and transportation, we're generally probably most familiar with. I just wanted to touch upon it. There's special qualities of it that can really inform our work. So like I showed before in an earlier slide around the PBCAT, again, the link to that is below. It's a very useful tool to understand, again, these sort of patterns about the who, what, where kind of questions. Can really help inform, again, looking at those patterns that we want to start focusing on in our efforts. So this just is an example, kind of a enumeration of all the variables that are included in each crash record. You can find each one of these, so you can start looking at, the roadway characteristics, whether it was rural or urban, time of day, these issues that can inform, again, our programming. So just kind of take a look through those. Again, these are just the record of our past, right? You look at the bicycle crashes in North Carolina over time, we see that it sort of jumps around. You can see on the right, on the left there, we see total number of crashes with bicyclists. Again, these are police reported crashes, so this isn't all of them. This does not involve most of the crashes that occur just with solo cyclists, for instance, where there's falls, things of that nature. But then we look at the percent of crashes that are fatal on the right. You see that somewhere between 2 and 3% of these crashes are fatal. And on the pedestrian side, quite unfortunately, we have very much an upward swing in more recent years, in say the last 5 or 6 years. So again, crashes are on the left with the number of crashes involving pedestrians, and then the percentage that are fatal. As you can see, the higher percentage of pedestrian crashes are fatal. And you can just imagine why that might be, right? Pedestrians are unprotected. That's one. And we see about more recently, about 7.5% are fatal over time, giving a sense of what the patterns we're seeing. An example too of mapping this or visualizing this is what Charlotte has put together. You can visit their site too and just look around to see how they're organizing things. As the high injury network map for Charlotte. Everyone seems to approach high injury network definitions differently. And I know Angela Berry there in Charlotte, if you're interested in doing something like this, would be more than happy to discuss with you how they developed their methods. But as you can see, there's definitely some patterns here, a lot of it concentrated in downtown, but there's some also ones that are a little more isolated than that, right? But this helps drive their, particularly where they're putting infrastructure, where they're doing sort of road safety audits. You can kind of look at, again, with the idea of looking at patterns. So really, why do we do this? Of course, you really do understand where you've come from. What is that record of the past? We want to develop a shared understanding on our coalitions, right? And understand the magnitude of the problem. So is this something that's getting worse in our community? Is this affecting some people more than others, some groups more than others? It gives us insight into where our safety priorities and needs really do lie. And again, that the pattern recognition, I think, is the most valuable part of this, right? We know, for instance, that more fatal and serious injury bike ped crashes occur on these larger road facilities, the arterial types. And we know that at least 3/4 of pedestrian injury fatality are occurring at nighttime, right? This helps us develop some programming. What do we do about these types of crashes based upon, again, that record of the past? What do we do in the future? How can that inform our efforts? Next, we have roles. This is probably the more self-referential part of it, is really reflecting on our roles and the roles of others that are in our partnerships. So just some roles. Usually we like to link them with action verbs. So we use things like engage stakeholders and partners. So our role could be, again, all around engagement, listening, challenging assumptions about issues. Why are people crossing at that location in particular? Challenge ourselves to think, why would they? Get into their mind, right? Talk to people that are doing these things. It could help us refine our goals and really understand the nature of the problem, so the target of those problems. The roles are also to think about what we bring to the table already with our prior knowledge and our plans. What has already been done? And start looking at the safety plans and studies, right? And reflecting on the expertise that we have in-house. Let's build upon that, right? And then using the available resources. Again, I'm going back to these R's again, right? It's like the resources, we have the program materials, we have the crash data. What about local hospitals? Do they have any data around ER visits? What about complaint records? So a lot of places have see, click, fix, for instance. Let's look at the patterns there. Where are we seeing a lot of these? What kind of facility types do these tend to happen on? What sort of community neighborhoods tend to be reporting most? And also stakeholders. So when we heard from Katie and Keith earlier, thinking through what are our partners who are not necessarily in professional positions to be contending with these issues. What are they hearing in their communities, in their subgroups? And how can you fold that into what you're doing, right? So the types of roles, again, we use an expansive definition with this, relates to our job duties. So, if you're an engineer, that is a job duty you have. You're there to design streets, to approve designs, to tweak them. But also, what other, outside of our own professional roles or job duties, what about the role of events in change? What role can that play? Or could it bring attention to something? What about the role of engagement itself? What kind of practices do we have with reaching out to different community members and listening to them, involving them even in discussions about what could be done? And then the supporting roles in the system ourselves. So we have our own plans, say our own metro, transportation plans. Who can play supporting roles in helping us implement a lot of things that are within our transportation plans or our Vision Zero plans, as Mark assessed earlier? A lot of the Vision Zero adopting communities, almost all of them are developing action plans related to road safety. So the kickoff events, just want to state that these kickoff events are really important to draw kind of public attention to what is happening. A lot of people in the public, and probably a lot of you know this, are not aware to the extent that bicycle and pedestrian safety really is an issue. And so this is a great way, a kickoff event that is to frame and focus and really bring values forward. We value safety for all road users, right? And just bring it to the fore. Getting elected officials involved in this is good PR for one, but it's also their buy-in around the value of this, around the nature. If we do improve bike ped safety, this is going to benefit us in so many ways. I think elected officials can get on board pretty readily with this. The media. So how do we even spread the word about this, right? So we can have an event, but if the media is there too, it can help us broadcast the event to a wider public that maybe doesn't attend. And then thinking about getting out in front of the issue by educating the public about plans before basically media and other groups help frame that for you. So getting ahead of that, we've seen some cases where sometimes it's not understood what the purpose of the program is. And the purpose is basically disseminated by other parties or outside of the program. And that helps set the agenda or the frame in the public mind about what Watch For Me is. This is an opportunity, a gateway, a kickoff is a really opportunity to help set that agenda, help frame that. We, again, from our partners have learned numerous really good practices and some developed these kind of principles around kickoff events. Go through the right channels, and that could be really any you can think of, but what do you think is going to have the largest reach or really engage your intended audiences, right? So public information officer is just an example of going through the right channels. So through the law enforcement department or the fire department, often they share one. Be timely. If there is a relevant event or newsworthy event or a high profile individual is involved in a crash, for instance, this is an opportunity to say there are things that we can do to improve safety out there. And Watch For Me is one of them. Come to our kickoff. Be ready for an interview. The worst thing, and it happens quite a bit, right, is that maybe someone in the media, this captures their attention. You don't want to be caught flat-footed. So have one or two people on the coalition that are coached up on how to frame, again, going back to the framing, how to talk about the program. What are the main points? Don't go beyond maybe 3 main points. What are the main points you're trying to get people to really understand about this program? So we have some talking points in the media toolkit. If you go visit the site, that visit watchforme.org, and then there's partner resources site you can take a gander at. There's, you can look at the media archive as well at watchforme.nc, watchmenc.org/media. Just some examples that are there from Greenville, Asheville, Chapel Hill, and Charlotte. A lot of them have had, and there's many others actually that have held media events around the kickoff of Watch For Me. Again, it's just helping set the frame around what this is and how it's beneficial for the community. Public engagement. I think this is outside of really looking at patterns and really understanding what seems to be driving a lot of the safety problems we have. I think this one is probably another key one within Watch For Me. The resources we have, the messages that we want to impart are really to help start a broader conversation in the community, among our stakeholders, among just the public in general, around safety. It's also it's a bidirectional thing, right? Also hearing from people. And no doubt, if any of you have tabled events and things, you'll hear from community members about some of their issues. Pay attention to those and listen again to themes that you're hearing. These can help inform, again, any number of things, your safety plans, for instance, and then the buy-in. I think there's an element that the more we bring in people and we really do honor their perspective, we clarify misperceptions about the program if there are any, and we bring in people to the fold. We're increasing sort of the buy-in of diverse sets of stakeholders in this. So if someone is for challenging the program itself, why not invite them to start have discussion around what the program is and how they might play a role in helping advance the program. Just a basic point here around this, that linking it back to Vision Zero, a few of us here at the Highway Safety Research Center developed these safety procedures along with partners around the state. What we had done is look through all the practices we could find around that are affiliated with safety on our roadways. And we reached out to a number of our colleagues in the state and said, if you were to pitch this practice or procedure rather, to elected officials or other decision makers in your community, what would they say? Basically, we took those that are effective, those practices or procedures, and we combined them with the political feasibility of them and developed these safety procedures you can access on the link on the screen there. But I'll just note that 2 of them relate to community engagement. So direct engagement and outreach is critical in Vision Zero and Watch for Me. Collaboration with other agencies is something we've been talking about ad nauseum already, right? These are practices that we see in the safety realm that are just really robust and really effective. The only way to really start contending again with that complexity of the problem. We need to have a greater sense of what is actually happening and how people are being affected by that through our outreach, and then to draw upon the resources of our other partners, collaborating with them and aligning our goals and our actions, things like that. So engagement principles. So we've had kickoff principles. We also now this is more of a programmatic thing with engagement. Messaging itself is not the only thing. It can reinforce our engagement strategies for sure, but is not the same thing as engagement or education. Engagement is 2 ways. Sending out a tweet is one way, is a scatter shot into the void. Engagement is really, really doing exactly that, engaging the attention of others in the community. Want to consider active. So we want to blend these things, right? We can't talk to everyone in the community. There's just not enough time in the day, enough partners, right, at the table. So active and then passive forms of communication. This is really about learning and practice. This is for people on our coalition and people that are supporting our coalition just outside of it. So with the engagement, it's a really good idea to maybe talk with some community members. If you have intended communities in particular, important influencers within a community. So these are often the people that are kind of the centerpieces, right? They tend to be maybe some elders or otherwise just really popular people in the community that can kind of represent those, the broader neighborhoods and such. Important to really focus it and include them in this as well, because they can really help you spread the messaging. The gatekeepers, so think of like fleet vehicle managers and school crossing guard training managers. These tend to be at the police departments. The fleet managers tend to be within public works or other agencies within the municipality. These are key gatekeepers. So fleet vehicle, they can focus on policy regarding the types of fleet vehicles that they maintain. They can even do speed limiting on fleet vehicles. There's a lot of things that the fleet vehicle managers can do. And crossing guard training program managers can really help with that as well. Everyone loves crossing guards in school zones, right? Crossing guards can be an important partner in this effort as well. Because not only can they keep kids safe crossing the street, they can impart certain messages, kids and the families as they're out there. And then some bridges to key populations. So where, say, there are people who don't speak English as a first language, for instance, or people who are relatively new to the community, if there's those coming in, we know that pastors, barbers, promotoras, or people who are embedded in the community in Latino and Latina communities that really can do a lot of engagement work, can bring people to the table, have a lot of influence in these places. We know the same is with pastors and barbers and others. So meeting people where they are, really, it's that direct community engagement and outreach, meeting people where they're generally gathering and building that trust. Some other tools, again, this more passive engagement or reinforcement of the message are these banners and print materials. As you can kind of see here in the slides here. They're really great to just, again, those key messages of your programs, just like training to talk to media, reinforce those with some visuals, right? What are some things you're really trying to get across? Yielding to people in crosswalks, for instance, or giving enough room for cyclists when we're passing them. Again, very simple messages, very clear to reinforce at all these different types of gatherings. It's a very good idea, and we've learned that it's a good practice. Even other passive engagement, messages in online utility bill statements we've seen. There's a very creative way to do this. Video PSAs, and the kickoff videos, there's other media that you can find on the website around the PSAs with respect to this. Again, these are meant to reinforce, or the outdoor and transit ads. It's about reinforcing your more central engagement strategy. Enforcement roles. This is going to work, as you know, those who are in enforcement or those who work with enforcement, law enforcement officers, there's an appropriate chain of command. This is really critical to get through the appropriate chain of command, right? To start talking about what are the goals of a Watch For Me program, clarifying any misconceptions about it, like this is not anti-jaywalking program. This is really an engagement strategy, right? To start talking about good, safe practice, driver yielding, giving people room who are biking. Common, but also enforcement really can be useful. We've seen many cases in over the course of this project where there's common interest in concerns in the community that just consistently come up in engagement exercises. Just continue to hear the same things about maybe it's a struggle to cross at a certain location, or maybe this is a pinch point for cyclists. There's unintended consequences anytime, right? We talk about engaging with law enforcement, just given power differentials, right? Law enforcement have a lot of power to sort of enact laws, and so really acknowledging this and thinking about others in the legal community, right? About the courts, the district attorneys, to what extent, like say if law enforcement were to issue citations to drivers failing to yield, would the district attorneys be on board with this? Would they honor those in court? And in the public at large, to what extent are people on board with what we're doing? But we've seen law enforcement can play a really positive role in identifying those patterns and where the problems are, actively listening, and coordinating with partners to lay the foundation for success. All right, we've gone through the roles. The last R. I bet you're just so glad that we're finally here. Right? The relationships. The relationships are really about expanding our capacity, developing insights. When we have a broader coalition of people, we just get a breadth of really high quality information about what are the real bike ped issues. When people are contributing to an effort, when they're held accountable in a sort of fun way on their coalitions, that really does relate to buy-in. And ideally, if there are different gatekeepers that people have to work with, approval to implement. So again, broader support in addressing issues, offering all kinds of new, novel ideas around resources, expertise, and of course, extending the reach of the program. So when we have broad coalitions, we can impact any number of people in the general population through our efforts. Like I kind of said earlier in the roles that we have with community engagement, when we talk about partner collaboration, what we've noticed too, and I think rings true probably for most of us, is that it's going to move, the collaboration is going to move the speed of trust. So these meeting regularly in person, whether via in person, in physical presence or virtually, often pretty critical. if there can be roles that people align themselves with or express affinities for, yeah, I would like to be able to set up more community engagement strategies, for instance, or I would like to be the one that really sets up the kickoff event and engages with the media. So these types of roles, right? And then following up, the best programs we've seen in Watch For Me and in Vision Zero are ones where people do feel committed to it, to the effort, and they're holding each other accountable in regular meetings. And again, accountable saying, you agreed to do this last time. How did it go? Tell us about it. If you didn't get to that last time, what can we do to help, right? Starting small is kind of key here. We don't want to jump all in because it can become overwhelming very quickly. So what we want to do is identify one thing to work on together and then see how that works, right? We like to say again in systems is get started and get better. So get started on something, whatever it may be, an outreach strategy, even a collective observation at a downtown crosswalk, and just see what can we do here. Let's try something out here, and let's get better. Let's see whether or not it works, right? And again, celebrate whenever you have success. If you see people, if you see drivers increasing their yielding rates, if you see pedestrian crashes and cyclist crashes going downwards, celebrate that, right? But also be prepared for any type of disruption. So turnover, transitions, or even changes that are generally likely to happen, like funding dries up. Be prepared for these things, maybe in plans and in contingency plans. If this happens, then we do what? So just some key potential partners, just for ideas. There are many more than this for sure. We've seen some of the common ones are these communications public information officers. These are the people that are the sort of conduit to the broader public, right? They often know media relations too. If you want to get a message out, maybe do a press release, for instance. Public information officers are wonderful for that. Park and rec departments, they're the ones that organize local events. Could also host after school programs, for example. Park and rec are great for any time you want to do engagement with those who are participating in these sort of local events. Planning public works departments, this goes without saying, right? They have ties with a lot of the other departments and often have a deep knowledge and understanding of the safety issues in the area. School system, when you think about the reach of the school system, it can be quite large. So kids and their parents and the school staff, when we can get messages and engage the school community. The police departments often are kind of leading these efforts locally, not necessarily, but they often tie all these together in the fact that they're out there observing more than any other group for the most part. And they can really understand where these patterns of problems are occurring and do a lot of different outreach enforcement operations as well. And of course, advocacy and bike groups, like we've heard from Katie and from Keith, connection to the community. This is the people that are walking and biking, right? So they are, again, they could be major conduits to those. These are just some key strengths and some typical partners that we see. There are, of course, many others. Yeah, I'm sure you can think of. Others could be like local businesses. Again, a way to just passively reinforce the message. So there's just some examples from Raleigh and Durham where there's, display materials and windows. And there's ways to even talk about enforcement operations that are a little more sort of community oriented and positive around, here's why we're doing it. Here's how it keeps people safer. And we're going to be doing maybe some crosswalk operations and good ticket programs. So this is an example from Durham where the people who used marked crosswalks at a time, to cross the street basically got a good acting good ticket, or drivers that were yielding, giving bicyclists room, that sort of thing. So it's just reinforcing, again, sort of more positive behavior. Universities are great partners as well. Talked about the K through 12 school system, but certainly universities too are kind of systems upon themselves, right? They often have student services. They have often new employer and student orientations, car bike registration programs, you name it. There's all kinds of places to put ads, again, passively reinforcing. We've seen these in our partnerships, working a lot with the universities to good effect. You think about universities, every year they have incoming people, often from out of state or even from out of town most of the time. And they are a great audience to engage, especially before they establish habits, right? When they've moved into their new community. Sustainability offices, university recreation. These are just, the list is endless on a lot of university campuses. So just want to briefly go over when we talk about complexity of the system, what does that actually mean or look like? What's an example of that? I think this is going to help us see the bigger picture. And also, if we're not really sure who our partners should be, who we might want to reach out to, I think it can help us do that as well. So just an example here, we're going to use is driver distraction. I think a lot of people, we know that driver distraction can be quite an issue. So just let's look a little bit under the hood of this. What do you think drives driver distraction? We'll talk about that in the schematic here. So one of the things you can do in systems work is start mapping out relationships between different variables. One is driver inattentiveness or distraction. So often you have the sort of focal point in the middle of these graphs. You can then see how the relationship distraction often relates to use of personal devices. So you see the plus sign there. That means use of personal devices is positive related to driver intention. The presence of enforcement or the perception of risk or consequences of being stopped might decrease use of personal devices. Okay, this is what we generally see as enforcement's role within addressing driver distraction, right? Gets a little more complicated though. So we know, for instance, over time, the convenience and use of using personal devices, data plans have gotten, the smartphones are a lot easier to acquire now. Everyone pretty much has one. The affordability of data and plan increase our uses and dependence on these devices. What about the time pressure that people feel? How that might relate to use of devices to check email, check in on meetings, right? What about fatigue that might set in from all the pressure we have? We actually see also, because if we see that everyone is distracted, well, I feel comfortable being distracted. What if there's a social acceptance of high-risk behaviors? What about driving in certain subgroups? Driving while impaired is socially accepted, right? That we know that impairment can make you distracted during the whole trip if it tends to, right? We know that maybe alternatives to driving. What if people didn't have to drive for every trip, right? That could cut down on the number of people out there driving while impaired. What about the safety and health-oriented workplace policies that we have? What about the norms we have at these places, right, around use of devices? Or about how we use our time? Are we a hustle culture? Are we saying that we have to be working so hard all the time? What about use of devices in our own perception of our own driving ability? Most people think they're better than average drivers, right? So I can drive distracted. That might relate to this, right? So we see how opportunities in access to jobs or just living in poverty, poor economic conditions can relate to all of these things. And then we get into the road design, right? So it's the broader system that relates to, again, that single behavior. We have at least these things. It's probably far more complex than this. But you can see how when we look at the different elements of this, right? So we have the traditional sort of intervention approach of law enforcement to tamp down on use of devices. Okay, what about alternatives to driving? What about the policies that we have at our workplaces or the social acceptance of high-risk behaviors? How do we address those in the community? Convenience and use of devices, road design. What about all these things? And who is part of those, right? Who can have any influence on any of that? Okay, so just real quick, going to go over another example of driver yielding. This is really central to Watch from ENC. Driver yielding to people in crosswalks. Just as an example, in the middle, again, we have drivers yielding pedestrians at marked crosswalks. This is sort of the key one, right? We have the idea that maybe the knowledge of the law relates to better norms around driving, around pedestrians, or in the desire to yield. Maybe if people just knew the law. That's one idea, right? There's probably a lot more at play, as you can see here, though, right? What about the presence of law enforcement with the desire to yield? But what about vehicle speed approaching the crosswalk and the ability to slow down? We know that drivers going above, say, 30 miles per hour may or may not have time to slow down, enough time to slow down for a pedestrian. What about driver attentiveness? That old nut there. We see driver attentiveness could relate to this thing. And we know positively that these things that are highlighted in green can relate to more yielding to pedestrians. Road design and posted speeds that align, right, with reducing or managing speeds upon where people are crossing, improves our ability to slow down, increases the likelihood that drivers will yield. The visibility of the crossing, or the ability to see them, the quality of roadway lighting at nighttime, quality of pedestrian facilities themselves, or even the presence of them. The number of people using a crosswalk, right, creating that sense of people are here, the expectation that people are going to be here. And then the driver norms. Are people aware that people cross here? What proportion of people do that? Do people know that 80% of people cross or yield here? That kind of question. Just I get this idea of the virtuous cycle. If we have more drivers yielding, it probably attracts more people using a crosswalk. More people using a crosswalk means they're much highly more visible. And of course, drivers then yield to them because they expect them to be there. So you can see how we can create both vicious and virtuous cycles within the system. And it relates to who, again, we should be working with in Watch for Me programming. Who has any influence on any of these things? How can they be, what kind of role can they play in the system? So again, I just want to take a moment to start thinking through or reflecting upon what our roles are. Are you an enforcer of laws and regulations? Are you a convener, an engager, something else? What role do you play in your work to improve road user safety? And what does an effective partner relationship look like to you? Just as last time, if you didn't want to speak up, you can certainly put something in the chat. And if you do want to engage this community here, please feel free to unmute yourself, put your camera on, whatever you feel comfortable doing, and contributing. I see Keith is saying he's an engager and an encourager. I like that. I like that a lot. Keith, I certainly welcome you to expound upon that. You certainly do not have to, though. Others have idea about what role do you play? Elizabeth Stewart says an enforcer, but also an educator. I like that a lot. Right? We often don't just wear one hat. We're out there enforcing laws, in the case of Elizabeth, but also educating around the laws. This is great. I guess another question for you. How often have you reflected upon your role in road user safety? Is this something that people generally do? Are you encouraged to do that where you are? Or is this sort of new to you? This is where you're being asked to think about your role in the system. Lydia says an engager and a funding liaison help to identify funding through the MPO. Thank you, Lydia. And Lydia's in Greensboro and part of the MPO there, and Vision Zero partner as well. And I totally can see how she's describing herself. And we have George, a convener, engager, behind the scenes educator. Oh, I like that, behind the scenes. That's cryptic. George, I'd love to hear how you what that looks like. And Keith, we have safety as a major focus for CDOT. So that's wonderful. Wonderful to hear. We have Becca here, the engager, encourager, and educator. I really like this addition of the encourager. I think Keith started it off and Becca added to, yeah, encourager.
George, I see you pulled your camera up. Are you going to share a little bit more about the behind the scenes educating? I was curious about that too.
Yeah, I think since we don't really have a formal bicycle pedestrian program in Statesville, one of the things that I'm able to do with past experience, but also bringing together others, is that we're able to educate members of our departmental staff, whether it's planning, public works, engineering, what have you, also NCDOT staff, and the leadership and others in the community on what programs like this can do for them, what infrastructure and other sorts of elements of or sub-elements of Watch for Me NC and other programs can do for them and do for the community. And so we don't really have anything formal, but by the same token, the informality of it is somewhat of a strength as well, because we're able to do things without without breaking any eggs, maybe, or at least in some cases, we can do things behind the scenes that can't easily be done without formal funding streams, for example, where there's multi-departmental engagement and working informally, just generally agency to agency and individual to individual.
George, thank you for that. Now I see exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, oftentimes, this word education, I think most of us, at least myself, I won't speak for everyone, think about directly to members of the public. It can also relate to, providing insight to our partners within our coalition. Everyone, again, comes to the table with their own strengths, and perspectives that are super valuable. Right. So I think that's wonderful way to kind of frame that. And Lydia is sharing that we're building on the strength of each agency to meet goals. I think that's wonderful. If we can build on the strength of everyone who's involved in our coalitions, I think we'd be in a much better place. And I think that's a really good practice, just to start really even identifying, understanding the strengths that everyone brings. Thank you, Lydia. And again, just like before, if you have anything else occurs to you and you want to share that, we're documenting everything. It'd be lovely to hear from you. With that, I'm going to move on to the next part of this. Is basically a broader discussion. I think what we can do is just move on from this. This is generally framed around existing partnerships of people who have fully adopted Watch for Me. And given that we have sort of a blended crowd here, I think we're going to kind of move across this, given that we've just also have a really good discussion around the different relationships that we have. So I just want to make a note here around your peers. So again, for those who are partners in Watch for Me NC space, please feel free to use this Gmail account, or Google account rather, the Google Groups. A lot of good information is shared here around, again, best practices, insights from local perspective. And we our team tends to share out through this this email account as well, any type of trainings that are coming up, or materials and resources that were made available. We'll post those there. Kind of like the two-way street, that is the Google group, we have partner page, which is basically all of the materials and the resources that are available to partners. This is not searchable online right now, but if you plug this in as a URL into your web browser, you can go right to this page. Includes a lot of different information about engaging with media, communications toolkits, the different PSAs that others have used, reporting forms, you name it. Everything is sort of located there and organized on that page. So with that, just wanted to kick things back over to my colleague, Sarah. It's going to help us wrap this up and talk about next steps.
Yeah, so we do have an assessment, just a quick little evaluation that we'll send to everybody who attended today, so that we can get some feedback from you guys, especially because we know that there's some non-Watch For Me folks in the crowd. So we're very curious to hear your thoughts and feedback. So please do fill out that survey when you get it. And as I mentioned earlier, we did record this session, so we'll also be posting that to the website. So if you have other people in your community that you want to share this with, or who were not able to attend today, we'll also be sharing the link to the recording. So be on the lookout for that as well. Next slide, Seth. Just another quick reminder about the upcoming workshops that kind of flow for this whole series. The next one coming up is going to be on June 8th, and it's the one for traffic laws and enforcement practices. Again, this one is a requirement for law enforcement agencies that are part of the Watch For Me program to attend that one. And then we have 4 more after that, roughly one a month after that. So please feel free to register for any of those that also pique your interest. We hope to see you back again, where we'll get into more details on some of these other aspects. And let's see, then the next slide, Seth mentioned the Google group and some of the contact information for folks who are part of the Watch For Me communities to be able to share with each other. If you have a question and you want to just reach out to Seth or myself or Kristen Blank, our communication specialist, feel free to do that. Our contact information is here. Sergeant Brian Massengill essentially, serves as a member of our team, specifically if you have enforcement related questions that are technical in nature on that end and you need an officer's perspective. He's always willing to talk through with folks about issues. So you have all of our contact information if you need to reach out to us directly. And with that wraps up today's module on safe systems approach. We have a little bit of time left because we wrapped up early. So if anybody does have any just general questions or thoughts, maybe information you want to share with the group or questions to throw out to the group, because we do have a mix of people who have been doing this for a while, as well as some new folks to the table. I'd like to just kind of open it for any remaining questions or thoughts that people may have. And you can put anything in the chat or take yourself off mute and just speak directly.
And thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate your attention and the wonderful contributions. I see a lot of people are thanking. Thank you all.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Really appreciate it.
And you're also welcome to contact us after the fact if you think of a question afterwards and you want to reach out to us. Please do so.
Please feel free. Yeah.
All right, well, not hearing any other questions coming up. We'll go ahead and wrap it up then. We appreciate your time and involvement with us today. And we look forward to hearing about your feedback and insights on your evaluation soon. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Thank you.